city manager for the city of San Antonio and one of the co-chairs for the CCDB. Judge Diaz and myself are very excited to welcome you to this fourth annual symposium for our domestic violence awareness. We're excited about the sessions that we're going to be hosting today. And we want to share with you that this symposium is very critical to the CCDB because it demonstrates our commitment to supporting victims and survivors by providing our community with the education and the awareness and how serious domestic violence is, and also to be able to address those conditions in our community that unfortunately allow for the prevalence of this situation to exist. So we're excited today to be able to give you the tools that are needed to be able to assist us in fighting domestic violence. So let me start just with a little brief history of the CCDV. Our CCDB was created in 2019 through a district court special order. The CCDB was established to formally convene local leaders in government, the judiciary system, law enforcement, prosecution, nonprofits, education, and healthcare organizations to empower our community to increase safety and justice for all by preventing and effectively intervening in domestic violence and its intergenerational impact. One of the roles of the CCDB here in Bexar County and our community is to educate the community about domestic violence, to improve the system that supports people impacted by domestic violence. But we cannot do this alone. We need you to be able to help us with the work of the CCDB. So this symposium is tailored and built to be able to give you those tools, and as part of those efforts that the CCDB is leading. So it is my pleasure to introduce my co-chair of the CCDB, the 150th Civil District Court from Bexar County, Judge Monique Diaz. Good morning, Judge.
Good morning, Maria. Thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome everyone to our fourth annual Domestic Violence Awareness Symposium. We're so excited to have you here today. You heard a little bit about what the CCDV, how the CCDV was formed. We are now in our fourth year of work, bringing together all of our stakeholders and identifying gaps in our communities' response to domestic violence and our ability to prevent domestic violence, and gaps in the system as a whole. What we have done over the last 4 years is pretty detailed. You can go to ccdv.org to learn more about our work. We have reports that we publish annually about what we have accomplished and what we plan to accomplish going forward. You will be able to find on our website our report that lays out our work for this year as well. For our fourth year of work, we have convened together and identified priorities, strategies, and interventions that we believe will have a collective impact on our community. We've identified those shared priorities, 6 new shared priorities and 3 carryover priorities from the prior year that we would love for you to learn more about on ccdv.org. Those priorities fall along different points of the spectrum of domestic violence prevention and intervention. In order to stop the cycle of domestic violence, we have to be sure that we are equally focusing on prevention before the incidences of violence occur, as well as, of course, intervention and improving our response to domestic violence after those incidences occur. Our work supports individuals, guides organizations, and members of our community, like all of you, to help us strengthen the systems at all stages, regardless of when a violent incident has occurred. You are joining us today and playing a critical role in our community's improvement of our response to domestic violence. By educating yourselves, by sharing what you learn with your coworkers, your family members, your neighbors, and your community, you are playing a very important role in ending domestic violence, because we all know that 1 in 3 individuals have experienced domestic violence at some point in their lifetime. So you do know people that have gone through it or are going through it right now, whether you are aware of it or not. So you can play a role in helping break that cycle of abuse. Today's symposium, today and tomorrow, is an opportunity for community members like you all and professionals in the field, like many of you are, to come together through thought provoking sessions and speaker presentations that will help improve our community's collective response to domestic violence. This year's symposium theme focuses on building hope and resilience in our families and communities. More than a dozen local and national experts are joining us to present on subject matters that will better inform the public at large, as well as legal professionals and providers who serve survivors, offenders, and their families. We are so excited to welcome our keynote speaker today, Representative Josey Garcia, who I have long admired. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with her story, but you'll be able to hear a little bit more about her story today. Representative Josey Garcia is the first woman active duty veteran to serve in the Texas House of Representatives. She represents West Side San Antonio's House District 124. And as state rep for House District 124, Representative Garcia is focused on advocating for those who need her most. Our veterans, children impacted by the foster care system that she went through herself, retirees, and working families who desperately need access to better paying jobs and affordable housing. It is my honor and privilege to welcome to you all our keynote speaker, Representative Josey Garcia.
Thank you so much, Judge Diaz. It's really an honor to be here with you all today. As your newly elected state representative, I was elected in November and in January took my oath of office. And I'm proud to say that during this session, I was able to pass the Vanessa Guillen bill, which marks September 30th as a day that we highlight and discuss military sexual trauma. But it's more than just military sexual trauma. It's so many other traumas, especially domestic violence, that is synonymous with sexual trauma. They go hand in hand. And to be a part of this legislation, to really highlight and bring forward the conversation around domestic violence and trauma has been a real honor for me. We also had the passing of House Bill 4333, which is the Reflejo Court Bill. And what that is it gives Bexar County the opportunity to continue on with the specialty court that focuses on domestic violence offenders and their families. It's super important for me to be a part of this because I didn't grow up thinking I would ever have the value of worth of becoming a Texas state representative. Matter of fact, it still kind of jars me to hear people describe me because for the longest time, I never thought I would live to see 46 years old, much less become a Texas state legislator, excuse me. As far back as I could remember, I lived a very tumultuous life. My mother, she's the youngest of six, and she gave birth to me at around 21 years old. And that's when things started getting really difficult for her. You see, my mother grew up in the country, and, you know, her family, her mother and father had alcoholism pretty severely. And there was a lot of abuse and violence in the home. But this was normal. This was typical for her. And so because of that, she really tried to find a way to get away from that environment. And when she did, she met my father. And then I became born. Well, this became a step where my mother's family shunned her because I'm biracial. I remember growing up being around my mother's family, and there were times where myself, as well as one of my cousins who was also biracial, we weren't allowed to enter certain parts of my grandparents' house. We had to use the restroom outside in an outhouse when our light-haired and light-eyed cousins had full range to the entire home. So from a very early age, I knew I was different. But it didn't really manifest to me until my mother was having a really hard time. We lived in Michigan. We moved around a lot. And she called my grandmother to come get me. I remember being about 4 years old and being so excited that my grandmother was coming from Florida to get me. I knew Florida had beaches and there was so much cool stuff there, and I just really wanted to go. And so her and my grandfather, they came to pick me up. At this time, my grandmother had remarried, and the grandfather I'm speaking of now was my step grandfather. They came to Detroit to pick me up and brought me to Florida, and it was so wonderful. I was so happy to be with them. I remember sitting on the porch with my grandmother, who had the most beautiful singing voice, and she was a huge fan of Elvis. So we would sit out on the porch, her, my grandfather, and I. And, as the time would go on, one beer would turn into two beers. Two beers would turn into three beers. And it would get me excited because they would always tell me, hey, Josey, go get grandma or grandpa a beer. And every time I did, I felt like, yes, I was doing something great, because my grandfather, he showed me so much love that I wasn't used to receiving. And he really, really treated me special. And that's when the night would fall and it would get darker and they would start arguing, and the night would usually end up with my grandmother beating my grandfather beating my grandmother. Sometimes these beatings were a punch in the face. One time I witnessed him grab a full plate of hot spaghetti and smash it in her face because he didn't like the flavor. There wasn't enough salt. It was something so minute, but this was typical behavior. And I remember not being afraid. As a child, I wasn't afraid of this. This was just normal. Um, it wasn't until, I got a little bit older, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old. This was typical. There were nights where they would fight. We would get the opportunity to lock him out of the house, and he would take a machete and bust through our front door and try to grab me and my grandmother, who were locked in her bedroom. My grandmother discovered early on during these events that there was one thing that would make my grandfather stop what he was doing. And that thing was me. You see, my grandmother, she used to use me to save herself. And when you think about that, and I remember feeling so strong and powerful, because when things started getting bad for grandma, I could rescue her. Because I would tell him, you stop right now. And he would. I remember having times where my grandmother, when after they have a few beers and it would start getting tense, my grandmother, she was sassy. She was really small and sassy. And my mother took right after her. And she told me, Josey, he's getting awfully mouthy. Smack him in the mouth. And I would. And he would do nothing but sit there and look at me and stop his behavior. Being a mother now, looking back at that, it's a very traumatic, I couldn't imagine putting my children through something like that. But at the same time, it was heartbreaking to see my grandmother being abused in the way she was. Early on, my grandmother and grandfather slept in different bedrooms. I would sleep on the couch. It was a little pull-out couch right underneath a big velvet picture of Elvis. So every night I'd lay on the couch, I'd look up at the picture of Elvis in his white suit in Vegas with the microphone. I'd reach up and I'd touch the velvet. And as I was falling asleep, oftentimes I would be waken up by my grandfather, who would often bring me to the room with him. This wasn't a one-time occasion. This wasn't a two-time occasion. This was a regular occasion. Not only so, but my grandmother would often walk in and see just how much my grandfather loved me. This behavior never stopped because she needed me. She needed me to protect her. She needed me to save her life. And as long as he loved me, then I could save her. One of the last times I remember saving her, it was another fight over dinner. And I remember him having my grandmother by the neck on the table, the kitchen table, and he was hitting her. And I looked and I saw this big glass vase. My grandmother, she had antiques. She really took very good care of everything that she owned. And I just remember I picked up that glass vase and I hit him in the head with it. Blood went flying everywhere. Glass went flying everywhere. My grandmother jumped up, grabbed me, ran to the room. We locked the door, called 911. He came with the machete, started busting through the door again. That night he was arrested. But that wasn't the last night he was there. He came right back. I ended up running away from the house. My mother, she kind of knew what was happening because although she never told me and she has passed away since, I firmly believe that she was abused by my grandfather as well. Because there was a point in time where she started asking me questions about what was going on at the home with my grandmother. And I told her. I was really honest. I was really transparent about what I was enduring. I wasn't upset or sad. I was happy because I was loved. And when my mother confronted my family, they blamed me. They blamed me because I loved him too. Meaning that I wasn't scared of him. I didn't run from him. I would sit on his lap when he asked me to. He would take me to the store and buy me candy. He would take me bowling. He did so many wonderful things with me that he didn't do with my cousins. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't different. I wasn't somebody who had to be put in the outhouse because I didn't look like my cousins. For the first time, I was loved more than them. And then it was around that time, around 8 years old, that I became incarcerated for the first time. I was incarcerated because I didn't go to school. I was found out in the park by police officers, truant officers, who found me playing. It was a regular day. I was out playing. They asked me, "Where's your mother at?" Well, I didn't know because during that time I had left my grandmother's house, went back to live with my mother, who at the time became addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol, and she was involved in prostitution. Well, I know all of that because I was with her. We would go out into the streets in the middle of the night, drug infested areas. There were prostitutes everywhere, but this was safety for me. Because when my mother would get into those cars and drive away and leave me 8 years old standing on the side of the road on the sidewalk with, you can only imagine, I was never afraid. I would go meet up with other kids whose parents worked in the same industry, if you will. And we would run the streets and, just really be kids. I remembered stealing food to eat. But there was this one time where there was a prostitute. Her name was Sam, and I will never forget her as long as I live because Sam was a very tall, beautiful, statuesque woman. And in the 80s, we had this wonderful supermodel named Grace Jones. Well, Grace Jones, she wasn't just a supermodel, but she was also an actress. And she was so beautiful, tall, black skinned with bald head. And Sam looked exactly like her. And every time I would see Sam, I'd be so excited until the one day she looked at me and she was like, "Get over here." And I was like, "Ooh, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. What happened?" And she asked me, she said, "Where's your mother?" Well, I didn't know. So she grabbed me by my arm, took me, fed me, and went on a mission to find my mother with me. So these people in the streets were people who protected me. These were my protectors, not my grandmother, not my grandfather. But I ended up incarcerated. And while I was incarcerated, because I didn't know where my mom was, I had a very hard time in a cell block room, metal doors. I was one of the youngest ones there. It was a co-ed dorm. Older girls were fighting all the time. And, I didn't care. I was always ready to fight because I knew I had to. Well, 1 week turned into 2 weeks turned into 2 months, 2 months turned into 4 months. And I couldn't understand why nobody would come get me. It wasn't until years later that I found out my mother would not get me because she refused to take the drug test. Not only did she refuse to take the drug test, but she knew she wouldn't pass anyway. And when you think, why wouldn't she try to pass a drug test to save me? I just couldn't understand. My grandmother, she wouldn't get me because she knew what was happening to me in her home, and she didn't want to bring me back to her house. I went on to move to New York at that time from Florida. This was in Florida. We moved on to New York. My grandmother finally did get me out, and my mother kidnapped me from her care the days following and took me to New York, where I had the opportunity to meet my father for the very first time. I had only been told the negative stories. My grandmother would always take the opportunity to point out monkeys on TV to let me know why I looked like I do and what my father looked like. Because he's Afro-Latino, she would always make these crude jokes. She wouldn't allow me, and my aunts wouldn't allow me to just have my hair in regular pigtail braids like most other little girls did, because they said I looked like the N-word. So I had all this anger inside of me, and I was so upset that, it became normal for my cousins to join in on that type of conversation. And as my cousins would join in on calling me those names, they would beat me. They would beat me while singing this song called a fight, an N-word and a white. The white don't win, we all jump in, and they would jump and beat me. They would make me fight their friends. And again, I was a good 2 years older than my one cousin, and 2 years younger than my one cousin, 4 years younger than another cousin. And this was typical for me. I became a fighter. And when I moved to New York and met my father and my brothers and my other family for the first time, that fight came along with me. Even though now I found myself in a real family situation, my father was an alcoholic as well, and he also was impacted by heroin. I would witness him abusing my stepmother. It was the cycle all over again, but I learned something very valuable, that I can protect her, because that's what I knew how to do. I had done that all my life. And a couple months after I first met my father, him and I were engaged in a fist fight. I was around probably 11, 12 years old at the time. And it didn't just stop there. I would fight in school. I would fight in the streets. I became super sensitive to anybody being disrespectful to me, for being hateful to me. Anybody who challenged my safety in any way, it was so easy for me to fight. And as I would go through this, I would picture my mother. My mother, after she had me, was able to find a sense of normalcy in life, and ended up with a wonderful man who, had a wonderful job, took her out of the streets, and gave us a decent life. I had my very first Christmas with him. But he also was addicted. And after my sister was born, it got worse, because it was a regular occurrence again for me to watch my mother be beaten over simple, trivial things. See, at this time, we had moved to North Carolina. And in North Carolina, that's where my sister's family was from. So again, I have family, a family that I would see on TV. There's a grandmother, a grandfather. They come from, they have a nice house. They actually have a house. They have, a car. They had a real Christmas tree. They had all these amazing things, and I was so excited. But at night, something as simple as my mother just answering in the wrong way would oftentimes find her being punched in the face with her little 5-foot body flying through the air. This would happen regularly. And as I gained my strength, I was afraid and terrified, because I knew I couldn't protect my mother. Because unlike my grandfather, my stepfather was a very big man. He was in construction. His stature, he was a super big, stout, strong man. So much so that one punch would send my mom flying feet, like far. My only recourse was to grab my baby sister and run. And we would do that. We lived in a trailer park, and I would take her in the middle of the night and just run. Sometimes we would hide underneath trailers because some trailers have the metal skirts on the bottom that you can open and you can crawl under there. And we'd lay there and sit there until we heard our mother. Or I would run and just run as far as I could and dive in a ditch, because I know at the ditch, nobody can see us from the street. Because all those times I would run, he would always come looking. I would wait for my mother to call my name before I would come out. And when she called my name, sometimes a friend would come and find us. We'd jump in a car and we'd leave. Leaving would take us sometimes back to Florida. Leaving would take us sometimes to New York. But the fact is I went to 13 different schools before I ever hit high school. Leaving was normal. And when we left, we would leave with the clothes on our bodies. We would leave all of our belongings behind. We would leave all of our toys behind, our clothes, our pets. And that's what helped me not get attached to people. Because anytime I started to like somebody, love somebody, have a friend, I knew I was leaving again. And it wasn't until I got in trouble myself that I was sent to live with an aunt. The aunt was my mother's sister. And when I got there again, I was so excited because she had a daughter that was a year younger than me. And I was like, great, here I go. I have another family again. But my aunt was a severe alcoholic. Because as I mentioned, my grandparents, my mother's parents, they were severe alcoholics. And so my aunt perpetuated that same, cycle of addiction. And I, again, became the brunt of her jokes. I became the target of her abuse. I was always told how I was never enough. And it was because I wasn't blonde hair, blue eyed like my cousin. And it was because she had so much animosity pent up in her because of my mother and because of the choices my mother made and because she had to step up and take care of me. And it was at this time that I started spending the night with my friends. One night would turn into 2 nights, 2 nights would turn into a week would turn into a month. And this is how I survived through high school, because I couldn't stand being in a home where my very existence was a problem. No matter how hard I fought, no matter how hard I worked, I was never enough. Every time it would come time for a report card, she would literally compare my report card to her daughter's and then go on to berate me about why I didn't get as good of grades as she did. I fought a lot when I moved there with her, because where I was at in Tennessee, our classrooms were segregated. You were either Black or white, and I was a little bit of everything. Racial violence, racial discrimination, sexual trauma, sexual discrimination, domestic violence, domestic, discrimination. All of these things held me in a place that I didn't value my own life. Because of this, I had a very hard time trying to plan for my future. I had a very hard time thinking that I was capable of attending college. The only thing I knew how to do was to move and to fight. And at 16 years old, I decided the military was where I needed to go because I was used to moving already. So moving all around the world wouldn't be a big deal for me. So I joined the military, and upon graduation, joined the Air Force and came here to Lackland Air Force Base in 1995. It was 1997 when I got a phone call from my grandmother telling me that my brand new baby brother was going through some of the same issues that I was. He was witnessing my mother experience some of the same traumas as I did. And at 19 years old, I got full custody of my 3-year-old brother. I took him and we moved to Germany, and that was the beginning of my life as an adult. The domestic violence and the sexual trauma stayed with me. When people would ask me in the military, "Oh, Garcia, where are you from?" It was like nails on a chalkboard because I had nothing to tell them. When people would say, Garcia, what do your parents do? Well, to say that my parents were addicted was shameful for me. When people would try to say, Garcia, why are you so mean? I never had an answer. I just said, I'm a strong person and it's who I am. It wasn't until I had my last son. I have 5 sons. My oldest is 24 years old. My baby boy is 6 years old. When he was born, he looks exactly like my mother. That began the road of healing for me. Because seeing his face made me, for the first time in my life, forgive my mother. Because a lot of time I was so mad at her. Because I would think, if you loved me, why did you let me go with them to Florida? Because I know for a fact that my grandfather's behavior wasn't new behavior. He had been stepfather than my mother from when she was a young girl, 9, 10 years old. And through all the things I experienced, I know I wasn't the first one. And I was mad at her. I was mad at my grandmother. I was mad at my aunt. And all 3 of them died without me understanding them. Excuse me. So I'm sharing my story today with the hopes that those of you who are watching this, if you're experiencing or have experienced any type of these traumas, it's not your fault. You're not alone. As you heard the statistics, 1 in 3 people experience domestic violence. That means you. That means your mother. Believe it or not, that means your father. Because a lot of times, generationally, we're brought up in these abuses. We're brought up thinking that this type of behavior is normal behavior. And it's not. It wasn't until I was able to understand the trauma that my mother and my grandmother went through that I was able to forgive, that I was able to let go of the shame. And that's my purpose. My purpose is to break the silence on domestic violence, break the silence on trauma. If you're watching today and you or somebody you know has been impacted by domestic violence, if you are a perpetrator of domestic violence, you too can seek help. Because if you're a perpetrator, there's a high likelihood you too were victimized. Today, tomorrow, in these symposiums, there is help standing by for you. By simply reaching out, putting a note in a chat, secret messaging, text messaging, you can inform somebody that's a part of this symposium. Let them know that you need help. There's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in admitting that you've been victimized or admitting that you are a victimizer. Because one thing that's wonderful about the domestic violence court, the Reflejo court that I mentioned to you is that this court is for first-time offenders. First-time offenders, we can find you help. And the help isn't just for you, it's for your family. It's so important that we all are present and that we destigmatize the conversation around this, because there's hope for you. If anybody would have told me, you know what, you're going to be a Texas state representative, I would never have believed them. Because my past, my history is so dark. I didn't grow up going to, fancy schools and having nice clothes, or having parents that loved me and supported me. I don't come from a long line of, great people. I come from shame. I remember asking a cousin of mine, she was doing a genealogy research on our family. And I asked her, I said, I'd really like to know who's our family? Where do we come from? And her comment to me was, Josey, we come from shit. But we don't have to be that. And I'm proud to be sitting here before you today as a survivor, an unapologetic advocate, an outspoken advocate, because my shame has died. That part of me is gone. I still live loudly through sometimes, having these conversations. I start to reflect and I remember things. And sometimes things that come to my mind are so traumatic to even think about, especially being a mom. I imagine, myself being the same age as my 6-year-old baby. And I remember the things that I experienced at that age. I ask all of you that are here today to please stop the cycle, break the violence, break the silence. You don't have to be ashamed anymore. You're worth it. You have value. And your story can save the life of somebody else. I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to share my story with you. I'm boots on the ground to fight these issues. As we know, with the pandemic, life is hard for all of us. There's triggers. There's things that are occurring in our lives that stress us out so bad. Lack of jobs, dropping out of school, relationship issues, just not being able to navigate a post-COVID world. All of these are stressors that oftentimes cause us to reach out and to hurt those who are closest to us. I ask all of you to please open your voices and don't stay silent when it comes to these very important issues. We're working very hard in the 88th legislature. This past 88th legislature, we worked very hard to make sure that we are addressing the issues of domestic violence, and that can't stop. We're only going to keep working harder and harder. And with that, we need your help, because laws are made through your voices. Laws are made through your testimonies. Because when we submit these laws, it's people like us, like you, who have experienced these traumas that are the subject matter experts. It is people like us whose voices are needed to testify in front of these House committees. Because if we're not able to change the hearts and minds on the committee, these bills will never get a vote on the House floor. So please reach out to us. If you have any legislative ideas, if you simply want to break the cycle and share your testimony, please reach out to our office. Our text and phone number is 210-701-7316. 210-701-7316. This is our phone number, cell phone, day or night. My chief of staff is Farrell Clark, Pharaoh, Clark, Clark. And he's literally up 24/7, 365. I kind of turn into a pumpkin around 10 o'clock. So please, at any time you have any issues or you want to collaborate, please send us a message and we'll be happy to do that. Thank you all so much. Thank you to all of the professionals that are here who dedicate your lives to people who have been impacted by violence, by domestic violence, by sexual violence. Thank you so much, because to take on the pain of another person, it's heavy. It's a heavy weight to bear, but you do it, and you do it gladly. And you do it not with, finances in mind, because we know being an advocate and being somebody who really fights for what you love doesn't come with this huge paycheck. It comes with trauma. It comes with sleepless nights. It comes with you waking up not knowing if you want to go to work today because you can't stand the thought of hearing another story of trauma, abuse, and even in some cases, death. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for having me. State Representative Josey Garcia, House District 124.
Wow. I'm sure that I'm just speechless. And I'm sure that all of you watching are in the same boat. That was incredibly powerful. And I cannot thank you enough, Rep. Garcia, for sharing in painful detail, I'm sure, what you've been through and how far you've come and how you've gotten here. As someone that has experienced that trauma and overcome it and is now in a position to advocate for others and really make a difference in the lives of everyone that you have spoken to today and beyond, we are so, so eternally grateful for you being here today and sharing your story. I want to comment on just a couple of things. We all know that children who have experienced domestic violence, have witnessed it, or been direct victims of domestic violence themselves, and witnessing it is a way of being a victim as well. Children are more likely to become perpetrators or become victims in their lives. And what we have seen with Rep. Josey Garcia is someone that has overcome so many obstacles and so many traumas. And statistically speaking, shouldn't be where she is today, but she is. And I say that to say it is incumbent upon all of us to ensure that children like Rep. Josey Garcia don't have to go through this alone, that we don't place the burden on the children to break their own generational cycles of abuse, that we come together as a society to do what it takes, whatever it takes, to support our children, to help them realize their worth, realize that none of what they have experienced is their fault, that they have hope, that they have a future, that they can be resilient. And that's by providing them resources. That is by learning through this symposium what we can do to help children and families that are experiencing domestic violence. And one thing for folks that are watching, if you're not an advocate or a professional working in this field, you're a member of our community, and we know there are many of you here with us. There are things that you can do as well. One thing that we want to stress for everyone is that if you know someone that is going through domestic violence, that you don't give up on them, that you don't turn your back on them or get frustrated if they don't leave, because we know there are many complicating factors and reasons why individuals cannot leave an abusive relationship. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. Be there for them. Be sure that you are their rock, that they know that they can turn to you without judgment, no matter what. And if and when you have an opportunity to provide them resources, to let them know where they can go to get help when they are ready. That is the most critical role that you can play besides being a support system for them. If you can emphasize to them, hey, you know what, you may not be ready to leave right now, but why don't I help you make a plan, make a safety plan for you and your family, you and your children, to increase your safety right now while you're still in the relationship or in the home with the abuser, and a plan for if and when you are ready to leave. There were some questions in the comments about resources for children and families. I recommend there are two places that you can suggest for people to create a safety plan. One is Family Violence Prevention Services, and we'll put their phone number in the chat. You can call their number at any time, and they will walk you through making a safety plan. You can also call the non-emergency SAPD phone number, and they will also walk you through to make a safety plan. Family Violence Prevention Services also provides shelter. They run the Battered Women and Children's Shelter here locally. They have counseling services, a food pantry. They can get you or someone you know, anything that you need. So we will put that information in the chat. We did also note in the chat a warning to folks. I will remind people again, of course, that this symposium does touch on subjects that you may find disturbing. We will have readings, media, and discussions around topics that involve sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, physical violence, identity-based discrimination and harassment, and other subject matter that may be disturbing or triggering for some. We do have advocates, thanks to the City of San Antonio, on standby, ready to assist you at any time throughout the symposium. If you would like to talk to one of our advocates, please click on the tab entitled Expo on the left-hand side of your screen and click City of San Antonio DV Advocates to speak to a trained advocate. Additionally, if you have any questions during today's event regarding scheduling, technical issues, please email us at info@dv-commission.org. info@dv-commission.org. We'll also put that in the chat. Thank you once again, Rep. Josey Garcia. We are forever grateful.